Okay, so let's get started. Let's put the few screens up and let's go from there. Hopefully you can all see that. Yeah. If you can't, please shout out. It's World Suicide Prevention Day tomorrow, the 10th of September. They hold one every year. And I thought it'd be nice this year to sort of get it in work time and do an hour and cover some of the salient points that we need to be aware of if ultimately we're going to save lives. And what I know, what I've read over the years, is that often I read that suicide is preventable. I don't know if I agree with that 100%, but I think there's more that can be done. And I think that's the purpose of today. So I won't be trying to say, yes, we can prevent every suicide. I don't know if we can. But I think by doing things like this, raising the awareness, looking at the reasons why people get into such dire situations, that we can help with that process. Okay. So a little bit about me. I know some of you I've worked with already, but I write books on mindset for young children. I work with some international companies. NTT, we've got 2 delegates from there today. I do some stuff from Granada Reports from time to time where they want some mental health sort of advice and things to do with current situations that crop up. And I do some overseas stuff as well. So I would say as well, when I was a lot younger, I used to work with some very challenged children. And for want of a better word, and I don't mean this personally to them, they were quite damaged from the situation they'd been in, even at such a young age of 12, 13, 14, 15. And I saw the impact of trauma at a young age on people. And it's a real key factor when we're talking about suicide. Our experiences as a child that can influence our behaviors and actions as an adult. And I'll bring that out as we talk today. I always want to make people feel safe. So I said to you before, ask your questions, maybe want to ask your questions. Don't feel as if you don't want to, if you want to put your camera off, that's fine. I like to see people's faces to see how they're responding to the information, but just feel nice and secure. Okay, I'm not going to shock or scare somebody. The first thing I'll talk about is, as we all know, the pandemic effect. And I often refer to this Kubler-Ross change curve. And this curve was created in the 1960s to explain grief. And if you look across that graph now, you can see it goes from the initial situation where somebody dies, we have shock and something denial. Then we get frustrated, and sometimes and often people can depressed for a period of time, maybe a length of time that's really significant. Maybe at some point people start moving up the curve, experimenting with the new life without this person, and decision to integrate a new life. Now, this is explaining grief, but it could also be talking about the impact of the pandemic, how we have gone through different emotions. And I guess most people would probably say since the pandemic in 2020, you know, it's made people who didn't have mental health challenges, made them presenting them, and people who already had them before the pandemic, it wobbled them and made them worse. And I think whatever we talk about now, we're sort of post-pandemic for now, it's going to have an impact on people's mindsets. So I just want to put that out there for you guys to say, you know, we're a wobbly time at the moment. You know, there's lots of things with the heating and the energy crisis and the war in Ukraine, lots of global and domestic things that can impact and probably have a negative impact on our mental health and therefore our suicide rates. I also want to say that the recording of suicide is something that it has changed since 2019, where it used to be beyond all reasonable doubt to prove it was suicide. Now it's the balance of probability, which will probably mean there's more suicides being accounted for. So the pandemic and the change in statistics is a factor that probably we don't recognize. Let me ask you a few questions. Can you tell me the number of suicides each year in the UK? Have a guess if you want to. I'll give you a few seconds. Okay, I must have taught you guys well, so I've taught you some of you guys, and I've taught you these facts before, but you obviously can't remember it. It's around, well, in 2020, let's put it this way, it was 6,700. And then there's no figures at the moment, but I've read unsubstantiated reports over 7,000 now. Maybe know the amount of suicides in the world. And again, I don't know how they compile these figures. You know, statistics, aren't they? But there's evidence to support there's about 1 million suicides each year in the world. And in the world, there's every 100 deaths, one of them is suicide. That's quite a powerful statistic, isn't it? We also know that in 90% of the cases where somebody has a suicide attempt, they don't attempt it again. That's positive news in one sense. We also know that 90%, another 90% figure, that people who do attempt suicide have got a mental health challenge going at that time. They're often distorted, they're misrepresenting things, and it's a crisis time. There is 10% within that 90 who actually rationally and logically want to end their lives. Maybe a partner's died, maybe they've got a terminal illness. So there's a difference in that figure there. In terms of the UK suicides, then that equates to about well, who's more suicides, the men or the women? Anybody?
Men.
Thank you. I know you know this. You've just been a bit shy this morning. 75% male, 25% female. There's in the UK probably about 85 deaths for male, 30 for women. Quite powerful stuff. If we talk about young children in schools from 5 to 16, some of the evidence suggests there's an average of around 200 suicides each year, and that's significant in such a young age. There's a connection with suicide for young people and self-harm, which I'll come on to as well throughout the slides. So we've got quite a few figures there. One of the things, I went on a suicide first aid course, and it's one of the references I'll give you at the end. And when I went on this course, it said that whenever anybody completes, we used to say complete, and the terminology for mental health first aid has changed recently. We don't say commit, because that was associated with a crime up to 1961, even though the media often say committed suicide, like they had a choice in it. And many times 90% of people don't really have a choice. They're in that frenzied state. The safest way to say it is to die by suicide these days. So we know that when one person dies by suicide, around 14 people, 14 people are directly affected, a close link to that person. But there is a ripple effect of 133 people who might have known that person, known a person who knew that person. So it has an impact on our society at various levels. And it's something that is so profound that we don't know the depths of it. If you talk about global, we talked about global before, 1 million suicides in the world. I think I mentioned to some of you guys on some of my courses. Do you know the country that's got the highest suicide rate? And they measured the suicide rate, the number of deaths per 100,000 deaths in that country. Any of you ever go name that country?
Japan? America?
America's good. Well, America's got 44 per 100,000. Japan, it's probably got more. I haven't researched that Japan. There's a lot of countries out there, but I suspect Japan's quite high up there. Apparently it's Greenland, and they have 88 per 100,000. It could be, as you're probably working out now, that seasonally affective disorder. There's been a bit of a brain drain in Greenland for many years now, and less investment in the infrastructure, physical health and mental health. In cold climates, they can have a subversive drinking culture, not going out as much, staying inside, and seminal suicides that sort of be prophetic almost, that people see them, and that sort of copycat almost effect of it. I don't know exactly. Some of the best countries in the world are around Eastern Mediterranean, Turkey and Greece. That could be a statistical thing, a reporting thing. It could be a sunlight thing, but there are differences. And, you know, suicide affects different strata in society. So let's go back to our presentation. That's where we left it. Let's go back again. So Halle Berry, Britney Spears and Tina Turner, they've all attempted suicide. And you know, it's interesting, you know, for every suicide, there's about 15 to 25 attempts. You know, when somebody dies by suicide, there's another cohort of people who are attempting it, and these people are obviously still alive, and they've had some challenges with media, with themselves, with their image, with parenting, and I don't know the exact reasons why. But when we said before that men are 3/4, 75% more likely to die by suicide, most attempts are made by women. Any guess why most attempts are made by women? Any thoughts out there?
Cry for help.
Say that again, please, Gemma.
Cry for help.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, that a cry for help. And we know from statistics as well that women, when they attempt suicide, they generally use less aggressive means like tablets, maybe cutting. And so it can be, as you said there, Gemma, a cry for help, where men tend to go for asphyxiation, strangulation, guns, and jumping off things. So as much as we say it's a man's thing, suicide, a lot more women are struggling with it.
Do you think it's because a lot more women are, and I mean this completely non-disrespectful, but because women are mothers,
yeah,
they're always more conscious of that childbirth. And again, I don't mean this anti-men campaign or anything, but men tend to leave a family household more than what a woman would, kind of thing.
I'll back it up with some statistics on that one. In the pandemic, there were lots of studies about the effect on the nation's mental health, and they found two cohorts in society who were the most affected by the pandemic and affected negatively their mental health. One was young women, 17 to 23. The other one was parents, female parents of children. And they found that those groups, those two in particular, were the most affected negatively by the pandemic. So yeah, there's something about parenting, caring for somebody else, maybe staying with the children, maybe looking after elderly parents. We don't know exactly, but the statistics in this sense say that women are much more vulnerable. And you've got two on the screen now, Katie Price and Kerry Katona. Both have sort of high profile media images. And Katie Price dealing with some challenges with her mother, and Kerry Katona documented drugs use. And we'll come on to these factors in a bit more detail shortly. But when you're in that public media and you're dealing things like drugs, and you're actually trying to then solve things in the media gaze, you become more volatile and vulnerable. Talking about men though, Ian Curtis, anybody know who Ian Curtis was?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, can you elaborate on that?
He musician.
Brilliant. Yeah, Joy Division. And I'm going to explain this point with these two people now, because the point is this, that when we sometimes have physical conditions that hurt us and compromise our lives, they can affect our emotional state. So Ian Curtis got diagnosed with epilepsy, and a lead singer of the up-and-coming Joy Division. And at the age 23, he died by suicide. And some of his writing was about, how can I perform if I'm going to have an epileptic fit? And he was very wary of that, and maybe he didn't see a future for him. The other one is Tariq Jarvid, the eldest sibling of the Jarvid family, of Sajid Jarvid, the mayor. And Sajid Jarvid said, I wasn't aware of it, is 53, I wasn't aware he completed suicide, died by suicide. And they said there was no warning signs. But in this case with Tariq Jarvid, he had a lot of physical health issues. Nothing as severe as, I suppose, as epilepsy, but a lot of other physical health problems that he saw his future being massively compromised. And it's interesting, you've got articulate, intelligent people like the mayor couldn't see it with his own family. Then we've really got to examine this a bit deeper and see if we can put some sort of spotlight on that. There are some other things that play a massive impact on it, and we've mentioned already a little bit of the stigma there, but ethnicity, we know that the Black and Asian people suffer more discrimination, probably have poor education, poor access to services in some regions, and that can affect their mental state. And if that mental state is compromised, then they're more vulnerable to acts of extreme danger of suicide. And that stigma can also be applied with ethnicity, but also if we put it right at the door of men, men seem to think that, you know, they've got to be the breadwinner, and I can't talk about my problems. That's not really a man. I'm supposed to man up, as they say, which is not a very unhelpful term. And I think the stigma associated with that is massive. And here's an interesting point for you, that stigma, self-stigma, that I'm not going to share with somebody I'm feeling down and low, and I can get a polarized view of the world and my own challenges. But many people beyond the stigma are just not aware that they're ill. And that sounds a strange thing to say. So if you're not aware that you're really ill, you think, well, life's a bit crap and let's get on with it and let's do this and let's keep pushing, let's keep pushing. That's what I'm supposed to do, my expectations, society's expectations. You can lead yourself into a very dangerous, narrow tunnel. And I think that's what happens sometimes. The LGBTQ plus IA, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and gender, plus any other sexual orientations, Q for queer or questioning, I intersex, asexual. Similar to ethnicity, they experience more discrimination and stigma. So they're more vulnerable to mental ill health. What about season? Here's an interesting question. Which season records the highest suicide rate? If you want to have a go at that one. I'm not trying to trivialize this. I'm just trying to make you aware of more facts out there.
It's got to be winter, isn't it?
It's not winter, but it's
No?
a good track, Evan. No, it's not. You might think winter for Christmas time and people at Christmas time getting upset, but statistically, it's not winter.
Spring.
It's springtime, Nikki, yeah. Some people might say, and I'm not an expert on this, but some people might say they've got through the winter, life's supposed to get better in spring, but I'm not feeling it. And everybody's looking forward to summer, but I can't see that for that future. So summer followed by autumn, the two main ones. Spring followed by autumn, the two main seasons were be vigilant all year round, but maybe more so after that, perhaps. This is a really important slide, this one, because I'm going to give you some reasons why. I'm going to consolidate the reasons for you in a second. Then we'll look shortly about what actions we can take. There's some football. I used to work in football a long time ago. And there's some footballers here like Gary Speed, I think he was 42 when he died by suicide. And we'll never know the full reasons why. All we can do is speculate to be aware for next time. But high profile person in the media, very successful, very, quality football for Wales and for Everton. And yet something changed in him. And I don't think anybody's ever examined that or able to examine the reasons why. The guy underneath him was Josh Lyons, who was a young footballer at Tottenham and got released in 16. And it was his expectations were that he was going to be a professional footballer. For the next 10 years, he really struggled with his mental health and ended his life by suicide at age 25. And he threw himself under a train. And that expectation, that pressure from himself or society, feeling let people down, that stigma that I should be a footballer, I'm not, that curtailed his life. And in fact, I do some work with the railways as well, and they tell me that on average there's 250 suicides on railways each year in the UK. And they're very much on these courses to try and prevent that. The other interesting one is a guy called Lee Collins, was 32. He was the captain of Yeovil Town in the National League, and he was the captain in the dressing room, the leader on the pitch, and he had a girlfriend and 2 children. And from reading between the lines and reading some of the evidence that was presented in court, it was suggested that he broke up with his girlfriend, his drinking went more, not drinking culture, and he had a cocaine habit, and the thought of not seeing his girlfriend and his kids and what would his friends at the club think about him. And sadly, he left us. The question mark is there because when I mentioned that figure before about we might not know the person directly from suicide, but the ripple effect. Somebody on Sunday, a young boy of 19, had an argument with his girlfriend. We don't know if he was drinking or not. I'm not going to make that assumption. It's late at night. He was in his car on the motorway and just ran into a barrier on purpose. And he was a local person, a young lad doing that. Now, I've mentioned those case studies to you. What are some of the things that might be causing this? Let's have a look. The key one is under 45. Often statistics will talk about death between 40 and 49. Sometimes below 40 is massive. But if I go under 45, it's quite a quite an accurate guess that anybody under 45 is at higher suicide risk than anybody over 45. Relationship challenges. I think sometimes we can be in poor relationships and not know it, or relationships that were good can for some reason just change, as in the case with Lee Collins. And that can be a spiral, especially for men. Use of alcohol and drugs, again, this really applies heavily at the door of men. When men get involved with alcohol and drugs under 45, and you put the factors on there for relationship challenge, you've got the potential for volatility. And I think it's something like that where it can go impulsively very fast. And therefore we might make a decision that's a poor decision that can end up with curtailing our lives. Another factor is trauma and genetics. I mentioned some of the children I work with, some of the horrific traumas they went through often sadly can follow them throughout their lives. It can affect their view of the world, their opportunities in the world, self-stigma that they're not good enough. And already you can see some of the telltale things we've talked about already fitting under that. There is a viewpoint that some people are genetically predisposed, not to necessarily to suicide, but for instance to depression and anxiety, which are clearly linked to suicide. And some figures I look at saying depression, clinical depression, we've got the diagnosis on certain criteria, could be up to 33% genetic. And that is something to be aware of with people. Self-harm. I mentioned before about 200 children aged 5 to 16 who will die by suicide. In half those cases, there's evidence of self-harm, generally speaking. And some of the figures I work with mental health first aid, they talk about if someone self-harms, they are 49 times more likely to die by suicide. That's a big jump, isn't it? And so might raise your eyebrows now to say, you know what, these are some key things I need to be aware of. Yeah, we're not going to talk about preventing it just yet. There's a few more to go. Money worries. Again, money worries for anybody in this day and age, in this particular moment in our lives, it's right up there, isn't it? And this is why I think the suicide rate is going to increase. And I think instances of anxiety and depression and other mental health conditions are going to flourish, sadly. Loneliness and stigma. When we're alone, like in the pandemic, not to see somebody, stay on your own, don't touch people, don't do this, you can get a biased view of the world. And maybe that view of the world is not an accurate one. And if I'm going to say one thing to anybody today, is that always have somebody you can open up to and tell them your most innermost secrets. If you've got or had decent parents as I did, that was my outlet to tell them anything. Burst into tears, tell them this, and they'll give you that unconditional support if they're good parents. And I think sometimes when you do lose those key figures in your life, parents or siblings or girlfriends or husbands, you can feel lonely at times, and we can get a different polarized warped view of the world. If you link that to a stigma, then I shouldn't be feeling like this. I've got to man up and I've got to get on with it, or I'm the woman in the family and I've got to look after the children and keep things going. I've got to show them the way forward. It can put immense pressure on people, which comes to my last one. Self-expectations. Where I am in my life now, I shouldn't be here. People are beating me. People are ahead of me. People are richer. People are more famous. We can do that all the time. And social media, as much as it's a good thing to open up the world, it can be demoralizing when we're constantly comparing. And I don't want to spend too much on that because it is a minefield out there. So there are some key suicide things there. Looking at that slide now, it's a really strong slide for me. Okay, let's look at some warning signs, because let's get down to nitty gritty. If we're going to prevent some of these 7,000 suicides, what are some of the warning signs? Anybody tell me some of the warning signs before I put them on the screen? Anybody know of any? Withdrawal and avoidance are brilliant, Darren. Yeah. And again, in the pandemic, we were supposed to withdraw. We were supposed to be on our own. So that was difficult. As I said, we're coming out of that now. That's a really good one. Avoidance and withdrawal. Anybody else got any more?
Yeah, telling people that they're feeling a lot better and that they're fine and leave me alone.
That's a really good one, Kate. I often call that, and I've got on the slide in a second, the Joker syndrome, the clown syndrome. where I'll just pretend everything's good because I'm sick of people pecking my head and say, all right, Ross, all right, Ross. Yeah, things are great, things are great. And often that could come with things like spending lots of money. Because if people have made a warning sign that they're going to complete suicide, and then I won't need money in 3 weeks' time on this date, so I'll spend the money and I'll have that feel-good factor. It might sound a bit strange saying that on spending money and, the things that Kate said there, but I think they're important. Anything else?
Appearance, maybe hair, poor hygiene, or dirty clothes, not looking after themselves.
Brilliant one. It's so obvious at times, but in the pandemic, I could have gone to the petrol station in my pajamas almost with no shave and long as I had, and people won't bat an eyelid. It's different now, but you're absolutely right. Appearance, that disheveled look, can't be bothered, whether it's in face-to-face or online. That might be certainly an indicator of anxiety, depression. Does that lean over to suicide? Potentially. Okay, let's put some up here, some good engagement there. So talking about suicide and throwaway comments like better off without me, changing behavior, said before, avoidance and appearance, smoking more, drinking more, or drinking less sometimes, overthinking, changing sleeping habits, presenteeism. Maybe tell me what presenteeism is in the workplace.
Okay. Making a point of showing up there in body but not in mind or spirit.
Yeah, absolutely. Like a zombie, showing up at work, you're present, but you're quite potentially dangerous to other people, dangerous to yourself. And absenteeism, warning signs could be coming to work late or early, or leaving late or early, trying to avoid people, talking about things. So under the radar sort of behavior. Putting the affairs in order, you mentioned before, like spending money and the clown thing that Kate said there before. And that they think, oh, they look great again. Ross looks great. He's changed. I don't have to worry about him now. But that's exactly what they want to do. They want to enjoy the last few days or weeks in that perfect scenario that everything's been sorted. This is an interesting one. After an attempt within 3 months of seeking professional help, people often get the strength to be successful again the next time. So I know 90% of people only attempt it once, but that 10%, there might be several attempts. And it's when we think they're safe, that they are gone to doctors, they got the support, oh, I can sit back a bit now. Some people get the strength to do it better next time. Often these feelings are very powerful. The 2 H's, hopelessness and helplessness, link straight into self-esteem or self-worth, that we don't think of value to other people, to society, to siblings, to as a parent, and shame and guilt. When we do something in public or perceive people to look down on us, that can be a massive, massive factor in taking on that dangerous line towards suicide. And this is why I don't advocate even the jokey banter, because you might say something where both people are laughing or a room's laughing, but something on the inside, it invokes a memory of a previous time when they were struggling. And you've mentioned it again, maybe personalized it, and they're thinking, well, I've got away from this thing, somebody called me big ears, and I used to be at school, now they're still saying it, I'll never escape it. What's the point? So be very careful on those as well. And again, the bottom bit we've sort of mentioned already, self-harm to suicide, anxiety, depression to suicide. Now take it off the slide for a second, so I want to keep seeing you guys. So what can we do if somebody's in, let's say, a crisis situation where somebody's acting as if they might want to end their life? Any preventive actions we can do, anybody? What do you think?
Boy, Algie. Good old Algie. Start listening to him.
Yeah. Approach, assess and assist, listen and communicate, give information, encourage professional help, encourage other help. That's the Algie for those who haven't done the course. And I think, it's a good point that, Gemma, it's first of all being alert, isn't it? You
Be
don't
able to recognize it, yeah.
Yeah, somebody don't go to a sign, I'm suicidal. So you've got to sort of, is that person suicidal? Is it just a down day? And just listen and just say, how you doing, Rob? You okay? Do you want a coffee? And you find a nice quiet place where you're not interrupted, and maybe outdoors, and let's see where the conversation goes. But there is a lot of evidence to suggest when we talk directly about people who are suicidal, it's a big factor in preventing that suicide. So you can go around the houses, but if someone's in crisis, you might want to say, and just use an example here, Rob, that are you suicidal? Do you intend to take your own life? And that might think, oh my goodness, I've just said it. You know, I've let the cat out of the bag now. Does that mean that person is going to be suicidal? Well, the evidence suggests the contrary. So if we talk directly about it, that's always a good sign. But as Gemma said, listen and communicate non-judgmentally. Now, if we talk about a crisis situation, we can often think about somebody, for instance, on a bridge jumping off, and people might say, well, if I talk to them and then, you know, I can't do anything, at some point they might come down, then they might jump the next day. And that could be true, but there's a key factor in suicide that it's time limited. Most people don't feel suicidal 24/7. It goes in phases up and down. So for your input, if they're up there in crisis, and to listen and be direct, and some of the things I'll talk to you about in a second, to bring that impulse down, it doesn't always go back up again. It might do, but it also might go further down. They reach the crisis, the peak, and then they're coming down again. So don't feel as if you are worthless in terms of, well, if they're going to do it, they're going to do it. They keep talking about it. It's time limited. And I think it's a really important thing to remember that. So let's imagine then, in a crisis, somebody on a bridge somewhere going to jump off, and I might go over if I see them. And the first thing I might do is I might even ring the emergency services. This looks out of the ordinary. It looks a bit strange. I'm a mental health first aider, but you know what? I'm just going to make sure and get some emergency services in. And then I've got my insurance policy before I go in and do something, interact with that person. I've done that. I go in and I might say to somebody, what are you doing up there? Are you going to jump? I might say, are you suicidal? I wouldn't do all those three things. I'd choose my language accordingly, but I'm being direct. Now, excuse me, when I'm up there and speaking to them, I don't want to be a threat. I want to be calm and confident, because we know that anxiety can be contagious. And he wants the person up there, a man or a woman, wants to know that, you know, I'm not scared. I'm asking direct, and I want to ask those questions. So if I said to them, are you suicidal? Do you want to take your own life? If they said no, what do I say next? Any guess on that?
Then what are you doing up there?
Exactly. So, okay. So what are you doing? And they might say, I just got upset with something, and I might, oh, what am I doing? Yeah. And they might catch themselves. Impulse, especially if it's with alcohol or drugs. So you're trying to break through that irrationality, but it's not a rational act to jump off a bridge to get what you're doing there. And if they say, no, well, why are you doing that? In a nice way. Do you want to come down and talk to me? Okay, what if they say yes? Yes, I'm suicidal. What's your next question?
Mine would be why.
You could say why you're up there. Yeah. And that's an interesting line to go on to, because it's a good point, Dan. It's not wrong that. It's because you get the conversation. The longer you're going to talk to somebody or listen to somebody, that time limited thing's probably going to come down. So it's a good point of view to go to. There could be a bit more directness that we could do. If somebody said, for instance, are you suicidal? Say yes. I might say, has it happened before? Yeah. And then if they say it's happened before, they might say yes. What's my next question? If they say it's happened before, they say yes. What's my next question?
What stopped it before?
Yeah. What stopped them? What's helped them before? How did you get through it last time? Was it your brother? Was it something you did? Was it your medication you stopped taking? And it's a great one to ask that, isn't it? So you said, are you suicidal? Say yes. Than before. And they'll say, if they said yes, we did that. What if they said no? What's the question then we ask?
Why now?
Why now? Brilliant. I'm just going to consolidate that point on the screen for you now. Okay, so those are some of the things, preventative actions here. Talk them direct. What's happened? Are you suicidal? Don't guilt them or shame them. Time limited. And prevention, depression intervention we talked about before. So this is a little diagram put together. And again, we'll give you this on the slides. So just the yes and no stuff. And Darren, what you said's good. You know, why, you know, and, you know, those sort of questions that lead them into listening. You know, I want to listen to you. I want to hear what you've got to say. So these are not gold standard by any means, but the one way of being direct. It's about a rapport. It's about listening. It's not judging them. It's not stigmatizing them. And I think it's very powerful to do that. And we don't know how we're going to react till we get there, but we do know through training, especially in the emergency services like the paramedics, when they go somewhere, they're almost acting like robots in a good way. They've got the routines to going through the personal, but they're doing things that's like inculcated into them so they can get the best outcomes for the patients in front of them. Okay. I think you've heard about these two guys. The guy on the right is called Johnny Benjamin, and the guy on the left who was attempted to jump off a bridge, and Neil Lairburn was as a guy who walked past the passerby, the bystander, and who effectively saved his life. And, you know, we're talking about preventative actions here. And so this is in 2008, Johnny Benjamin, not 21, stood on the bridge in London, was going to jump over. The first preventive action that Neil Lairburn did as a bystander is he actually took action, and he went across and he said, "Hey, mate, what are you doing up there?" And then he started a series of conversations that went on for 30 minutes. So that time limited aspect obviously subsided. And Neil was brave, he was confident, and he talked to him, he listened to him, and he made some connection, this rapport. They found out they lived within, you know, 5 minutes distance from each other, similar sort of age, grew up in the same sort of area, and they started bonding a little bit. But critically, what Neil said to Johnny was to say, if you want to get it off your chest, I'm here to listen, I'm not here to judge you. And I think sometimes when you're strangers, you can do that. Sometimes with people we know, we're scared of sharing something because they might find out we're not who they think they are. One thing that Neil did do, which wasn't as good, he said, if you want to get off your chest, that's great. Then if you need to do what you're going to do, like jump over, then that's up to you. And we don't recommend that. And if you watch the video, I talk about this on the training. So just keep it simple. I want to hear your story. Do you want to get off your chest? You know, and if I can help you, obviously, you know, I'm going to help you as much as I possibly can. It's a good story. And afterwards, Johnny Benjamin, he said, you know, what was the key factor? He said there was two things. He took an interest in me, and he said, as a throwaway comment, I think you'll get better. And sometimes we say the smallest things or do the smallest things that you don't think are significant, and other people can pick up on that. And you might have experienced that in your life, maybe not in suicide, but in life, where someone says, you've got some good progress here, you're going to go far. And you go, wow. And it just impacts you. So hope and recovery, if we're talking about preventative actions, giving people hope and recovery is such a powerful, simple thing to do. There's a guy called Kevin Hines. Let's go back, just skipping my slides there. There's hope and recovery. Kevin Hines, anybody heard of Kevin Hines? He was 19-year-old man, young man, and he went to the San Francisco Golden Gate Bridge there, decided he wanted to throw himself off it and end his life. There's been like 230 odd cases of people doing that, and only a handful, and I mean a handful, 4 or 5 people survived. He was one of the survivors. And he went over to that bridge in the morning, and he didn't have a massive traumatic background. I think his dad left, but he still had contact with him. He had ADHD, and I think they weren't significant, I don't think, from reading about it. But he just got a bit down, and he went to the bridge and thought, nobody's interested in me. And a policeman just walked past him, and a bridge worker just walked past. And a couple from, I think it was Switzerland, said, can you take a picture of us? And as he took the picture of this tourist, Kevin was starting to cry, and the tourist never noticed it. He just felt invisible. So he decided to run off the bridge. And as he ran off and jumped, he changed his mind. And instead of going head first in the water, he went feet first. He eventually survived. There was a story of a turtle supporting him in the water. And, you know, many months later, and broken bones, he now goes around the world as an advocate preventing suicide. And somebody said to him, what would have stopped you jumping off that morning? And he said, very simply, if someone would have smiled at me, if someone would have taken notice of me, if somebody would have engaged with me. Now think about those three things I've just said. Just sometimes we not do that in people we know in the workplace or at home. We just ignore it. We're too busy with our lives. If you want to talk about a really good preventive action, is to slow down and take notice. I work with a lot of seemingly, supposedly, and definitely very sharp, intelligent people. I often see them running too fast, and they've not been as effective as they possibly could be. And I think we're all possibly guilty of this from time to time, of just not slowing down enough to see what's around and to see where the need is. So take an interest in people. Hope and recovery is where it's all at. You might think that's a bit of a cheap shot, you're going to get better, but I think you'll get better. I'll help you on your road to recovery, making plans, seeing optimism and aspiration. Often the things that are missing in someone's suicidal thoughts, they can't see the future. So I think as we come towards the end of it now, do we have a sticky plaster approach to this? Or do we need more radical surgery? You know, is it something we can do now? There's some quick wins like today, hopefully. Or do we need to look at things in a society way, look at a funding sort of way, doing it an educational sort of way? Why is it that, you know, in certain countries, it's more prolific suicide than other countries? Do we need to copy some of the other countries? And what is it about what they do? And I think there's evidence to support that both of these approaches are necessary. You know, in a very simple way, if you want well-being and you want to enjoy your life more, we've got to have these things on the board here. But I can't say to you, just have these 5 things and you won't be suicidal. It's not as simple as that. But we do know, for instance, when we are sleep deprived, when our sleep is poor and compromised, that can often give rise to anxiety and depression, all sorts of other things, you know, misrepresenting what's happening. Sleep is one of the key things. And again, I'm not saying if you get perfect sleep, you'll not be suicidal, but it is a factor, as is exercise and diet. Being connected to people, talking to people, listening to people, getting out of the house, meeting people is massive. For the men, this self-esteem and purpose is a big driver, often rooted in historical, out-of-date ideas about how we should operate. So this is a very basic one. It is not a panacea to suicide. If I show you something, another slide here, we know that early traumas or lifetime traumas and self-harm are big factors. If we've had family or friends who have died by suicide, that can have a self-fulfilling prophecy on some people. And so statistically, that increases your chances. Certainly being isolated, unrealistic or unchanging expectations are big factors. For men, not exclusively, but predominantly for men, alcohol, drugs, and age are massive factors in avoiding suicide. You know, within all this, getting support, professional help's a big thing, especially if you've had the trauma or self-harm, or you're dealing with ongoing anxiety and depression. Getting that support before it escalates is critical. So, you know, there are some support agencies that I regularly use and talk about. I know a lady recently whose son, a young, high aspirational student who attempted suicide. Hopefully he's recovering now, but Papyrus came in, worked with them, are still working with them, and it's a powerful organization, that one. Suicide First Aid, there's actually a free suicide course. You can go on a 3-hour online one as well. And again, when we finish this today, I'll give you access to all this. And I know in Kaplan, I know we've got someone from Kaplan today, I work a lot with Kaplan, they have on the bottom of the email things like Shout and Confidential Help, NHS and Samaritans. I think if you're looking at a longer term solution to this, it's about emotional literacy. It's about our young children, giving them the tools and the ability to share their feelings. And sometimes in the 60s and 70s, when I was growing up, I was quite fortunate. My parents were very open about lots of things, but many parents weren't. Just suck it up, man up, get on with it. This is what you're supposed to do. These are expectations of you. And we tend to suppress feelings and emotions. If we keep suppressing things and putting like problems under a carpet, that carpet gets full. And so the ability to talk about challenges, emotions, feelings, fears, aspirations at a young age, that creates the template for a lifetime. So this starts at a young age, especially when we've got the impact of trauma massively impactful at a young age. So if we can develop the emotional literacy, this will give us one opportunity then to start changing this stigma balance. Okay, I'm going to come off that now for a little bit. We've got, sometimes some questions. What I said at the start was important. I do believe that suicide is preventable. I don't think it's 100% preventable, and that might be a controversial thing to say. I think there's certain things that sometimes we go through that can really hurt us. I certainly think, from the work I do with some of the books I write for young children, giving the parents the tools then to actually get the children to articulate the feelings rather than push them through academic tests all the time, which are necessary, perhaps a bit later in life, but not so much so early. I think that's a big tool. I think when you're in crisis, getting access to those support services, those experts is critical. And you might want to have a conversation, as Darren said, to talk to somebody and say, have you tried talking to these people? These people are interested, and give them some tangible things that people can hang on to. As individuals, though, slowing down, being more aware, and being direct. And don't be scared to have those conversations. Obviously, don't have it in public. Have it where there's confidentiality involved. Choosing that environment, choosing that time is critical. But the longer we delay it, the more Russian roulette we're playing, because it's time limited and somebody could be impulsive and it's happened and it's too late. Like the guy last Sunday on the car on the motorway, 19, falling out with his girlfriend, and you just wish you've had some input onto that somehow. What do I know at 61? A bit. I know certainly a lot more than 19. That's not to put anybody down, a young person, but we tend to, as you get older, get things perhaps better in perspective. When we're younger, we're more impulsive. And I think just to give this education to younger people where the impact's massive, we need to put more resources into that. So in your jobs, if you can involve yourself working with that younger age range, under 45, that's what I call young, but certainly that, teenage time, that's when you get the massive return on your investment. And it's not a business proposition, but that's the effective way to prevent more suicides. We talked about society and different cultures. I think we get a lot of stuff right in this country. I think there's a lot to learn from other countries as well. So we've gone through a description today. We've got to some potential ways to prevent it. We looked at some statistics, why these things happen. And I'd be interested just to, if there's any questions that people want to ask me or just share ideas or thoughts, then that'd be a good forum to do it for the next few minutes. So I'll just keep quiet for a second. Then I'm going to talk to me about that. There's always got one question. There's always one question.
Well, first of all, Ross, I take exception at under 45 being young, having just celebrated my 45th birthday.
All right. Okay. Yeah.
Still feel very young at heart. Thank you very much.
Well, you're very
But
much
no,
aware, Darren. You've been on some mental health training. You're here now, so you've got it right at the forefront there. So you're in the right place. It's all upwards from here, Darren.
I know it's based on statistics, so tongue in cheek. But yeah, prevention is better than cure, and there is no cure for suicide that's been completed. So I think this is really worthwhile, and it is definitely tricky, but it's just maintaining that level of awareness. It's being alert to things, you said, and knowing what some of the signs might be, and knowing what some of the approaches are that you can take.
That change.
Yeah, really worthwhile reinforcing some of that stuff.
Yeah, and I think we know a lot of this stuff. I'm guessing that, but sometimes you just need to be reminded that the stuff I learn best when I remind something about something. Then as you get older, you get looking at it in different contexts. So I think the reminders with age are very powerful. Don't be scared. Don't be scared to have those conversations. That's the big thing. Don't ignore it. Like Johnny Benjamin, Neil Laird, he could have walked past him and it could have been a different outcome altogether. Any other questions from there from anybody?
Ross, thank you very much for going through all the slides and content. And I'm glad you said at the end, I've slow down and be more aware, because probably for the past year, I've been back in the office now for about 18 months, but I've used to feel quite guilty about it. If I knew that I was getting quite a busy day, I'd start blocking off half-hour slots in my diary so people don't book me for meetings. So I'm sort of glad you said that, because I used to feel awfully guilty for doing that, because just so I can sort of have time with just so that to stop me from rushing about and constantly trying to meet deadlines and that sort of stuff. So just it wasn't a question, just a comment. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
An observation. We all need to slow down a little bit. If you don't slow down, how can you speed up? When you get to really good levels of performance. And I talk about performance in a generic sense, that if you're up there all the time, there's only one place you're going to go to. And that might affect you, but the impact of you in your group of people you work with, colleagues and family and friends, that's a big fact. If you're out of that picture, you've got to be up there. You've got to be present. That's a good word. You've got to be present for these people. And you don't have to take it all on yourself. You can signpost, you can support, you can show people different things that can need to be done. As Gemma said, the algae bit to it. So just to slow down, I see some very, very intelligent people, much more intelligent than me. And I'm thinking, you're going too fast, and just to be more aware. And it's such a big thing to do. Yeah, so thanks, Dr. We also talk about happiness hour, don't we? We're taking time for yourself each day. It don't have to be an hour. It could be 10 minutes here and 10 minutes there. I've done 2 mini crosswords this morning waiting for you guys, and I'm gonna mow the lawn afterwards for 12 minutes. It only takes me 12 minutes. I do things getting outdoors and doing things of that nature just to make sure I'm not going too fast, Any final questions then, guys?
What's your thoughts on hormonal changes, like with teenagers and older, women and that kind of stuff? What's your thoughts on that with suicide?
Just say that first bit again. You just blocked out a second, Kate, there.
Or hormonal changes.
Yeah.
Teenagers going through, it not being discussed enough and them not understanding. And I think hormones are a massive, massive factor that everybody ignores.
Yeah. This is why, young people can be much more vulnerable, especially if they've had a trauma. People take more risks than younger. It's part of growing up, get their identity and belonging. And self-harm, we talked about, for instance, could be cutting. It could also be being abusive relationships. Self-harm could be, taking risks in cars and jumping off buildings and stuff to prove yourself as part of the pack, that I'm a leader, I'm different. We're establishing identity. On the youth course, which I said I teach on, there's a guy called Dr. Andrew Curran, and he talks about the impact between 14 and 18. We've got 2 chemicals that be produced. The first one is dopamine, and dopamine is a reward hormone, and it goes along a line like this. When it gets to 14, it starts going up and being produced. And what that's saying to the individual involved is that you want to get reward, you want to prove yourself, you want to take a risk. So the actual body's programming you to become from a teenager to an adult, like a rite of passage for 4 years. And what normally keeps us steady and not taking risks before 14 and after 18 is the production of serotonin, which calms us down. And at 14, when the dopamine goes like this, the serotonin can't keep up with it and it just keeps nice and stable. So a gap appears. And that gap, that 4-year gap, is where the hormone, dopamine especially, then takes over that risk-taking behavior. But we've also got the other female, estrogen, progesterone production, growth hormone with children going through different growth spurts, and changes in friendships, moving house, schools, instances of mini traumas, if you will, that can impact on someone's perception of who they are in the world. So this is why we must give them education programs at a younger age before they come to 14, not at 14, before they come to 14. So that makes you think we can start this off in primary school. And I do quite a bit of work in primary schools about calming methods and thinking skills. But I want to get into the parents at that age so they can implement it beyond the school with the kids on a daily basis. So yeah, I think there should be some national curriculum on this sort of stuff. And it depends. The biggest thing for me is family and framework. If you've got a nice, secure family and framework, you can ride a lot of things through. And I think the kids I've worked with over the years have been so much abused at a young age. And we're talking from months of being born up to 12, 13, 14. They're almost very difficult for them to have a normalized life. the damage has been done, so to speak. And we can sleepwalk ourselves through this, but education is the antidote to it, to educate people, to have these conferences now for us people to talk. Good question, though, Kate. Right, I'm going to, unless someone interrupts me, I like to, used to be a PE teacher, I like to finish on time. So I'll finish, I'll start the recording. And if you want the recording, just send me an email and I'll send you the slides and the recording, and also give you some discount on my books. I'll give you a code for the books as well. Okay. Thanks for joining us today, guys. And if we save some lives, you know, what better feeling is there than helping people in the world? Whether that's saving lives or just helping them, you can't, anybody cannot tell me there's a better thing in the world than that. So we've done something precious and special this morning. So thanks for your attendance, and have a good day. And our paths will cross at some point, hopefully.
Thank you very much, Ross.
Thanks,
Bye,
guys.
everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks, Ross.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Ross. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks, Ross.
Right.
Thank you. See you later.
Thanks, guys. Excellent.